This is John Holl. Welcome to Drink Beer, Think Beer, the podcast that gets to the bottom of every pint. I'm currently drinking a Capella Porter from Ecliptic Brewing, and I hope that something equally as delightful is in your glass. Nile Zacherle of Mad Fritz in California is my guest this week, and he's coming up in a moment. But first, I'm happy to tell you that this episode is produced by Beer Edge. Check out beeredge.com for articles, podcasts, and to subscribe to the newsletter written by myself and Andy Crouch. Also, be sure to follow Beer Edge on social media at The Beer Edge. And beer festivals have gone virtual this year. If you're looking to drink and support a good cause, check out the Denver Rare Beer Tasting 12, taking place on the weekend of September 25th through the 27th. It's hosted by Pints for Prostates, and the festival is a live online event with 8 hours of content spread across 3 days, including panels on beer topics, meet and greets with the luminaries of the craft beer world, videos from breweries around the country, and virtual bottle shares. Check out pintsforprostates.org for more information. So, there's a lot going on out west right now. Some of it good, like the hop harvest, and a lot of it bad, like the fires that are raging out of control. Napa Valley is often in the news when it comes to fires in California, and while it's known for wine, there's also beer to be found. Nile Zacherle straddles both worlds. He's both a winemaker and a brewer, and is one of the more thoughtful members of the beer community that I've come across in recent years. He'll share his story in a minute, but what's enjoyable about his beers that I've found is that they live inside of specific styles, but never fully let that define them. I think that this is thanks in part to his approach. He brews small, he brews with local ingredients whenever possible, and he isn't afraid to let the beer follow its own direction. It's almost like a trust exercise between the beer and the brewer. He's been busy during COVID, and while the current batch of fires isn't an immediate threat, the smell of smoke is in the air, and it's a reminder that there's always a worry. And so that's where we start, with the worry that comes along with being in a place that could be impacted. Nile spoke to me from the brewery in California. Here's our conversation.
Yeah, I mean, what's happened for us, because both our brewery, typically breweries are in town. I mean, there are folks, like Ale Apothecary that are outside of town that, I mean, he would answer, Paul Arney would answer this question differently because he's up in the mountains. And I mean, we were up there this summer and it was like, don't start a fire. Like, this is a hot box, it's everybody, everything around you could go. And it's like that in our surrounding areas here in Napa Valley, although in towns, not so much, although they have been doing these power shutoffs. So, for instance, our second week back to homeschooling, we had a a rolling power outage for like 2 days. So Our kids started their homeschooling on a small generator, a little Honda, running our refrigerators and keeping the router going and their computers plugged in, and and then we're running off to go to our wineries that we're still in this lockdown and can't drive certain roads to access certain parts of the valley due to safety concerns. It's been crazy. I mean, what it is it's a disruption of business. So every time we have these kind of events, it sends a signal to people that want to come visit or want to taste, because we're a destinational area or location, to not come. It just that flag just kind of keeps, I want to go to Napa Valley, but
Yeah.
I don't know, there are fires and God, they had, but yeah, we're seeing more and more of this, and in places that were just machines, these wineries that just crank, they're slow as can be, kind of, I wouldn't say dead in the water, but certainly in contrast to what they used to be, dead in the water. So yeah, it's been kind of an interesting journey for sure. Yeah, I think as a business owner, you delve into these territories that you're really kind of uncertain. But climactically right now, you've almost, as soon as we had the power outage, it's kind of like, okay, roll out the generators, do this, do that, do this. You're really, that this is not, it's not the first time this is going to happen. It's going
Yeah.
to happen again and again and again. And now when August hits, the winds start. And when the winds have converted from these gentle winds to now extreme winds, and we're in a drought year, all these things stack up into kind of a very much a kind of a dangerous predicament. And so, and that's what happened. It just happened a lot quicker than we all thought. These lightning strikes hit. They started these random fires all over the place in very remote areas that are hard to get to and difficult to access. I mean, you can access them, but then it's rough terrain.
Hmm.
And it's interesting because these are areas where we ride our mountain bikes and we go way in the backcountry of these parts of Napa Valley that are maybe legal or not legal, and or there's some easements and some non-easements, and you kind of go from Calistoga over to here and over there, and I mean it's very rocky, remote, desolate, kind of difficult terrain to fight and access. So
Yeah.
when fires start up, it's kind of like, okay, let's hope the wind direction works in our favor. And I think living in these small towns, fires can start in towns, but on the whole, we're probably safer in town.
So when fire season is upon you, or when it's at least like on the horizon, do you start to think about how to modify the brewery, how to modify the business? Like, are there things that you can do during the rest of the year that maybe you're hesitant to do just because things could change so quickly? Or is it important to sort of just keep on a schedule and sort of have a sense of normalcy? And if the world interrupts, then the world interrupts.
Yeah, I mean it's a good question because it delves right into the core of what Mad Fritz, how we operate as a brewery. We never have operated like a traditional brewery production and sales platform. I mean, I'd say we're probably more akin to a small boutique winery than we are a brewery, although we are brewing almost as much beer as we brewed last year. Not quite. I mean, I took a little bit of time off for a family vacation, and because we've let go of several like part-time employees, that's put more of the onus on me to be 100% production, which
Yeah.
is good. It's good. It's healthy. I like it. It's more stress, but then I modified things. So okay, well, if I'm going to work this much, I'm going to pay myself a little more, and hopefully this will all kind of work out. But I would say in general, we'd evolved with our tap room opening. I think that was in 18, to do a little bit more DTC that wasn't by appointment. And prior to that, it was all by appointment. I mean, you can't go to a store. We don't off premise our beer. So our beer is just too expensive to sit on a shelf. I mean, you're going to see a 12 pack of some, or a 6-pack or 4-pack of crazy hazies that you want, and you're going to grab that. You're going to see this expensive bottle of beer, and you're like, wow, I can grab 2 of these 4-packs for the cost of that one bottle. That, hey, it looks good, but I don't know anything about that. And then it gets older, and it's sitting out. It's not the way to communicate what we're doing in an off-premise environment. I mean, we've seen this with high-end wines too. You can't convey the property, the family, the people that make these locally sourced products happen. You can make commodity source beers and go after kind of an off-premise platform, and I mean, I've thought of doing that. Like, we could certainly create another category, another brand, and start putting stuff out. But when you circle the wagon back over, you close the circle again, you say, well, what am I doing? Why would if I did that, then it would conflict with what I'm doing now.
Yeah.
Like, what I'm doing now is reaching for the pinnacle of origin specific brewing, authenticity of origin. If
All right.
I make,
But what does
you know,
that mean? What does authenticity of origin mean?
it means that the impact of the ingredients is paramount to the quality and flavor that you taste.
Okay. I mean, break that down for me, because
Yeah.
I've had your beer. I've talked with you about this, but I know the listeners haven't had the benefit of it. That sounds like it's a nice marketing line, but there's
Mhm.
something deeper about that. How did you arrive at that as your thrust of the beers that you wanted to make, but also I, how do you also humanize that a little bit?
Well, humanizing it's easy because it farming doesn't actually occur without a community of people, and that's the super, But what's crazy about it is that until you actually grow your own barley, malt it yourself, or work with these hop growers, or try and find a mill or a seed cleaner or a combine or plots that you can plant on, or creating your farming community that you can create a product with, that reflects that very gestaltic statement I made. You realize that it is very much a human element, that and we're imperfect, by nature, and that's the beauty of human and kind.
Yeah.
um, and so I would say that these beers are, I could definitely say, like, okay, like some of these hop growers, sometimes the quality isn't where we want, but you build relationships and you begin to work on quality. And people that are like-minded and believe in the aspirations of creating locally grown and produced products will hang on. They'll continue to partner with you. And then you'll have people that will come and go. And that's, again, that's part of the human element. That's farming. It's challenging. And people, and this is the kind of the grape world too, or growing wine, is that there's some people that have certain platforms for how they make their wines or beers, in which they can just call up and go through a catalog and purchase whatever ex Munich they need, or Lovibond crystal, or how many pounds of they want to fill their silo up with X protein level base malt, and
Yeah.
you kind of recipe this into. I mean, it's fine, like we all love Haagen-Dazs vanilla ice cream, but like what happens when that where all the cows were farming and what the season was like, and when you got that milk and you made that ice cream, you're like, oh yeah, this ice cream came from X farm, this cream came from the Petaluma Gap, from this property where they grow this sort of grass, and in this particular year, you know such and such happened, and that's why it's got this really crazy flavor. So we decided to create this ice cream with this and that and this, because it all wove together. We're seeing the same kind of thing when we grow our own barley here in Napa Valley, or in Mendocino, or in Sonoma. The flavors that come out of this barley, it's not perfect. Our proteins are too high, or things are happening in the kiln that we may like or not like. And this is a very touchy feely. This isn't automated. This is very hands-on. So origin brewing in itself, in a nutshell, was a way to define this kind of what I call authenticity of origin, that beers and products that we consume will reflect a place and a time and the people that help make that happen. And like I said, it's imperfect. You
Yeah.
can't taste our beers and be like, oh my God, it's the quintessential, you know, this style beer. And that, to me, is actually what's wrong with beer, is that when beer gets so run down a funnel,
Yeah.
or the dang, I mean, not to say that a GABF gold medal winner or whatever hits the bullseye. It's probably pretty damn close, but it may not I've heard these arguments about the session beers being 5.5 that got the gold medal or whatever. And, you're kind of like, yeah, it's this is imperfect, but when you kind of funnel these beers towards a bullseye and a stylization formula, you might as well just be a commodity. You're a factory that's making a product, and that's really not that hard. It's hard to make things consistently exactly the same,
Yeah.
but you can get pretty damn close if you run your quality assurance and quality control tight enough.
Right.
And we all know this. I mean, there are breweries that have been doing it for decades, and they evolve. Those recipes evolve, and I'd say that's we are on that journey constantly. Like, how do we make a better beer? How do we take our process, what we do, what we source, and make a better beer? And I would say that if anything, what's driving that are our farmers. Is where are the ingredients coming from? Who, what one hop grower is working out, and now the other hop grower isn't. And our labels depict every ingredient and its origin, and varietal or variety.
Yeah.
And so that kind of barrier defines us and defines the product. And that's really the statement when I'm talking about origin beer and this authenticity of origin. When you look at the back label, you can say, oh, wow, this beer is from here, here, and here, and the water's from here. And this brings up a lot of questions. You're kind of like, well, what's this mean? What's that mean? And what's this? Well, it may not mean anything to you, but it means a lot to us. And so we're going to present that. And maybe eventually, as you consume our beers, you'll learn about this journey. And I think that that's actually probably the biggest challenge, is that we are so kind of geeked out on ingredients and their idiosyncrasies that
we, as in the royal we of Mad Fritz.
Yes, yeah. Yes. I mean, Stefan, who's working with me pretty closely over the last few years, you get indoctrinated into this process, and you really start seeing these impacts of the ingredients. Because I can make all the decisions myself, but it's really nice having other palates to bounce these ideas off of.
Okay, so what comes first? The idea for a beer or the ingredients that you get in?
Definitely the idea is there. Well, I got to pour beer. So, I mean, right now I'm drinking a pale lager. It's a Maibach or a Hellerbach, I guess you could call it a lot of different things.
Okay.
That evolved. It's a great example of your question. We've always used the Colorado malting Pilsner malt that they have.
Mm-hmm.
And we originally started out with glacier hops, which are kind of a snappy, citrusy driven hop. I didn't want to go after, German Satz or Hallertau, because I was just like, well, that's not local. Let's be as local as possible. Over time, we did Crystal, which we could get from Lake County. We modified it, and that was a really nice permutation to kind of take away some of the harshness of Glacier. It was just a little too aggressive. I mean, this beer was modeled after kind of an uber, like imagine a Pilsner or Quell, but more Bach driven. So there's a lot of malty.
Well, now you're speaking my language, but yeah.
And so then it was like, okay, so we did the Crystal phase, and then the Crystal, it was the last harvest of Crystal from that farmer in Lake County, which is 45 minutes from my house. And so we had to look somewhere else for the labels and for the beer. So we said, well, let's find local domestic sauce. And so we found some in Idaho. And it's a bigger grower. And it's good. But we're going, that I already know. I mean, it turned out nice, but we're going right back to Crystal that's being grown now for us in Sonoma. And so we're building, contracts and agreements with hop growers over in Sonoma County that are growing Crystal, and we'll be able to go back there. And Crystal is a great substitute for some of these classic noble hops. and it fills that void, and you can be local, and not purchase from some monster hop yard in some other state, thousands of miles away. And
Yeah.
so I really think that it also creates, it's more expensive, but it also creates this connection to what is local. And so this beer, I think, as you've heard, it's evolved. At the base of it, the core of it's all the same. It's just the heart and soul of that base malt, how we brew it. It's not a step infusion. It's not a decoction. It's a single step infusion. So, but then it sits in barrel for 1 to 2 months. It's augered obviously at cool temperatures and typically made during the winter time. Um, so yeah, I mean, I think that, it's also the idea. I mean, Osthaus came with, I knew we were going to have so many local hops that, like, we need a beer that allows us to do a single hop yard and a single hop IPA.
Right.
Like, we need a label for that. Like, and we're going to stamp this with a stamp from these. We've got a new hop grower. They're called Blossom and Vine, and they're just outside of Santa Rosa in the
Sorry. So
Russian River.
blossom, like a
Oh,
flower blossom.
yeah,
Okay.
they've grown lavender and all kinds of other
That's
things, but
fun.
they're now growing hops, and they have an acre or two, and they've got some unique varieties, but also some classics. And so, I mean, it's just one of those things. You have a new hop grower, they bring in some beautiful looking hops, top grade hops, and you're like, okay, we're gonna do a single cascade, single farm beer, and that's when you taste the terroir. And when people are members, because again, going back to your previous question of,
Yeah.
how do we run this business, is that it's membership driven, and it started that way. And we, cultivate that, that 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 platform, so that it'll gives us the freedom to create, um, affords us the ability to create and pay these local growers.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons why our beers are so expensive. It's not like we're just making money hand over fist. We have high overhead, and our ingredients cost a lot. So, I mean, we've literally created beers based on the kind of necessity of, wow, we're bringing in last year we brought in 1,100 pounds of wet hops, dried them and packed them. This year we're probably closer to like 800. And we just received a freezer today, a walk-in freezer that we're going to build over the weekend, so that we can have better storage. We have all kinds of freezers, but we're going to modify that, process. We may end up getting a pelletizer to support the local hop growing community if we need to, and we'll see, when we get
Just
there.
for your use, or to pelletize for others?
To pelletize for others, perhaps. There's just really nothing in Northern California for hop growers that need a processor, and we can't do a lot. We
Yeah.
might be able to do a few thousand pounds. It's not going to be huge, but it'll be something that just, pay for the pelletizer, and also just give an avenue for folks that are doing wet hop beers, or maybe they want to come pick up the flowers that are dried, and then, or we can pelletize it later, like, we can kind of give, an option, but we're not there yet.
Yeah.
We're taking steps that secure our, resources and building out our platform. So, I mean, this is that growing local beer. It takes time. I mean, we didn't start malting the barley we'd grown in 2014 and 15 until 2016, because we didn't have a maltster, but we had already grown the grain. Or a malting unit. So it took us some time to get all these pieces together. It took, years. I mean, you can come in with a lot of money, I guess, and do all this, and stamp the bottle, but for a husband and wife to just kind of start this thing up, it's taken time.
So I'm curious, because right now hop harvest is happening. It has been happening. It'll continue to happen for the next couple of weeks. And you talked about getting some wet hops, some fresh hops in, but then you're drying them yourself. You're not making an IPA that has this fresh hop aroma to it. You're not taking fresh off the vine hops and throwing them into the mash.
We're not doing wet hop beers,
Okay.
but we are doing fresh hop beers. One of the problems with wet hop beers is there's just so much moisture in the hops. And then scheduling your beer schedule, your brewing schedule around the reception, harvest and reception of the hops.
Yeah.
So one of the things that's great about our kiln is it may not be able to do more than a couple 100 pounds of hops, but we can also dry 40, 60, 20 pounds, 80 pounds. We can do 3 different varieties in the kiln at once. So you can spot pick your hop yard, bring it in, and secure it. It means that we can protect every variety and it can be picked at its optimum level, not just based on some brewery schedule for making a wet hop beer.
Mm-hmm.
And, you can just imagine all those people's schedules trying to come together to make a wet hop beer. And then when you put the wet hops in there, there's so much water in there. And there's some unpredictable elements to it that you need to get really used to, dealing with. I mean, gravities are going to drop because you're adding water. And then you're adding this kind of green, vegetal, fresh thing. I mean, I don't know about you. Do you smoke, your weed right off of the? Do you dry your weed, or what do you do before you smoke your weed?
I'm
you
I'm
know?
still not cool enough to get a weed hookup, but yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, I'm being sarcastic, but you know what I mean. It's like, it's a different deal. It takes a lot of hops, wet hops, to make a wet hop IPA, and so it really, you have to know what you're doing. And frankly, I like the control to brew whenever I want with fresh hops that were, just come right out of the freezer and, from right over the hill.
Napa Valley still has a very much, or it is, and I think probably forever will be more wine centric than beer centric. And I want to talk about your wine career in just a moment. But are you treated as is Mad Fritz treated as like an oddity in Napa Valley? Is it treated? What's the reception that you usually get? Either by
Um,
locals or by the tourists who come through.
I think it's a fun. It's been actually really that part of my own personal career as a winemaker, and then creating Mad Fritz with Whitney, has been a really fun, um, shift for my career personally, because yeah, there hasn't been any good beer in Napa Valley. I mean, there's been beer in Napa Valley, but it's always been kind of like good, like meh, like no one really doing that anything that spectacular. I mean, you think of like what Russian River has done since it started at. I mean, when I moved to the valley, Vinny had just started working as having his little Russian River brewery at Corbell Winery
Yep.
near Guerneville, and and then he transitioned, and prior to that, obviously, he was down in Temecula and whatnot. But I mean, just that, he really hoed a road for a very high level of craft, in Sonoma County, and we just have never had that. There's a high level of craft of wine being grown and produced in Sonoma County. Um, Napa Valley has been kind of looking at its own belly button for a long time, and it's filled with Cabernet. And it just, sometimes you just can't see, the forest from the trees, I guess the vine from the vineyard sort of analogy. It's too bad, frankly. But, in some ways I call it kind of the adult Disneyland, of alcoholic beverages. We have some distilleries and whatnot, but it's not really like everything. But it's not like a Las Vegas. It's about the wine.
Right.
So the beer is kind of my wife dragged me out here, and I like to drink beer, and this is awesome. And so you get that a lot, and it's good to be a bit of a refuge for someone that needs a cleansing ale. And yeah, whether they get what we're doing or not, that's where you see that kind of interface, in the tap room. So yeah, I'm not sure if I'm answering the
No,
question,
I think
but
you are. Um, but you also have a job working in wine as well, in the wine industry.
yes. And so my my role is, a director of viticulture and winemaking at David Arthur Vineyards, and I've been there for 13 vintages. Prior to that, I was a winemaker at Barnett Vineyards, and then prior to that at Chateau Montelena. And then I made wine in internationally as well, in Australia and in Bordeaux. And my degree is in fermentation science, but what got
Yeah.
me to UC Davis was brewing. So,
Yeah,
but
you
when I
were
was
you started homebrewing with your dad.
Yes, exactly. And I went off to college, community college in Santa Cruz, and kept brewing. And I was geeked out on fermentation. I mean, I was doing independent studies with my community college chemistry teacher, trying to learn more. I was just kind of, hey, I have this idea. What do you think? And he's like, there's no one I've had in the last decade that's ever wanted to do an independent study. I was pretty geeked out on it. And that kind of got me to Davis, by that, just being inspired and driven to learn more about the fermentation process. And I discovered wine at Davis, and then I realized, well, why don't I do both? And so wine ended up being a much more fulfilling, you know, career for me
How so?
at that time. Um, well, when I left Davis in '97, I brewed for Anderson Valley Brewing Company. I tried interviewing for wine jobs, and they I mean, I still know these, winemakers today. They're like, no, you got to figure out what do you want to do, wine or beer. You got to pick one. And it's just like, well, all right, well, can't I do both? Like, isn't that like, what's wrong with doing both? And, obviously I was young in my career, so I did need to choose something. And so it didn't work out so well with wine, but I got hired at Anderson Valley Brewing Company, where they're clearly like out in the middle of nowhere,
Yeah.
desperate for, some people to come. And
Yeah, they need
um,
warm bodies. Yeah.
they need some warm bodies out there. And it's a beautiful place. I mean, I'm a country person, but it's a small town. And when you're in your early 20s or mid 20s, and yeah, it's a little tough.
Sure.
But what I learned after about 6 months of being at the brewery and designing their whole quality assurance, quality control program, and they're setting up their laboratory, and I was the third brewer and the bitch that cleaned everything up at the end of the day. While everyone else was out back drinking 22 bombers and smoking joints, I was the one in the brew house, running caustics. And, you know, it was fun. I mean, I learned a lot. It was like kind of one of those things where when you work hard and you learn it all, like there's no replacement for that. I just feel like I can bust ass in the cellar even today. Well, I still have to, and it's a joy. Like, yeah, there's times when you don't like it, but you built up a skill set in those years, and a knowledge base that carries with you, and it's a wonderful thing. So I mean, it was hard, but it was great. But what I realized was I felt so separated from what I was doing. We were just making the same beers over again and over again. And it was just a production schedule. And it was just, you have to remember, this is craft beer in 97, 98,
Yeah. I
99.
mean,
I mean,
it's in a different galaxy at this point. Yeah.
exactly. I mean, I mean, I've been studying beers since I've left, Hawaii, and went to Santa Cruz. So 90, 91, 92, I was in Santa Cruz, and I was geeked out getting people to buy me, goozes and lambics, and, the Littamans and the Samuel Smiths. And, we drank all that stuff. We got our hands on all those styles, but, we were almost like you're like this obscure niche. No one drank that stuff. I mean, it was out there, but not like it is today. And I don't know, maybe that's not quite right, but it sure seemed like it based on the context of how beer has blown up. Um, so, I mean, during that era, it was almost like it was a little like, I guess it was kind of more like 90. 95, 96. I mean, you had all those kind of like brew pub concept, you know, I don't
Yeah.
know what the hell the names were. There were,
No, I know what you're
hops
talking.
and
Yeah.
barley or what, there's just like everything under the sun, these kind of franchise brew pub, beer lineups that you've seen a gazillion times and you're like, ugh, um, it's just another brew pub. Anyway, I mean, heck, I'd go there over a lot of other restaurants.
Well, sure. You were
Still
always guaranteed
today.
to at least get a decent burger, or so you hope.
Yeah, and they'll probably have fresh beer, hopefully. Even if you don't like the style, you'd be like, well, they made it here. That's cool.
But so
Um,
you jumped to wine though, and then you found a way against the I don't know the prophecies or the proclamations, I guess, of the early folks who said you can either do one or the other. Um, you're doing both now, and I'm curious from the maker that you are of how those two worlds coexist. Is there a lot of overlap? Do you have to turn a switch when you go from one place to the other? Do does the education that you pick up along the way benefit one side and then benefit the other along the way? How do you be both?
yeah, I think that's a good question. And as you were asking I mean, I am not. I can speak some French, but it's limited because I don't practice it much. And since I've lived and worked in Bordeaux, but my Spanish is workable, but it's not fluent. But it's definitely I use it every day. Um, so the best analogy is that I'm pretty damn fluent in winemaking because I have 24 years of doing it. Um, and then I'm pretty fluent in brew making, beer making, even before I started Mad Fritz. I knew the process. I didn't have to like figure out what I was going to do. I knew. I like once we understood the concept behind Mad Fritz and what and why and how we would create it. I mean, really, it's the why. Is the critical, element to Mad Fritz, which came from wine, which came from my inspirations of being a winemaker. Wine isn't about making a product and just putting it in a can. I mean, it is. I mean, there's commodity wines out there, but if you look at the kind of magnitude of price points that we see in just the luxury side of wine. I mean, once you get past about $30 or $40, I mean, you can still have a crappy $40 or $60 bottle of wine. I mean, that's crazy. I mean, how many sink dumpers do you have of a $40 or $60 bottle of beer? I mean, you might, but there aren't that many $40 or $60 bottles of beer out there.
Yeah.
But in the wine world, there's a lot of them, a lot of them, and that's just the lay of the land. I mean, there's crappy products everywhere, and it's up to the consumer to navigate their way through this stuff, which is it's a big task. But I think there's a fluency that I've built up over time, and it's not that anyone else can't do it. Anyone can do it. It's just, it's time under the belt. It's like working under different winemakers, getting a really grasp of your craft, good, strong grasp of your craft. And, I'll be honest, when I started Mad Fritz, I mean, the first beer wasn't, I mean, it still turned out, we released it, it was great, but, it takes a while to learn your, custom, you know, machine shop made brew house that you've used old wine equipment to make a good beer better. Um, so yeah, I mean, I wish I had a fancy push button, whatever. But then again, I also really love paddling in and mashing in and not making a lot of beer,
Even
focusing
even
in on the
still.
ingredient. Yeah, I mean, if if you take labor out of something, like, I mean, it really, I mean, I remember, I mean, a good buddy of mine, John Prody, he went to UC Davis with me, and he ended up at Pyramid at the big Pyramid plant in Oakland, Berkeley kind of crossroads there. And I remember visiting him in '97. Here I was up in Anderson Valley, and Anderson Valley was all like we had valves to run the steam. It was all by feel, and when you discharge in the 38 barrel mash tun, you did it with the rakes pushing out the grain and you're raking it out. And this happened, whatever, a couple hours. It was a good little workout. You kind of move from here to there and you're kind of moving. But, pyramid, it
Honest
got
day's
to be
work for an
sit.
honest day's pay. Yeah.
Oh, you sit at your desk, you're looking at your screens, you're clicking on your valves, you're making sure that the PLC's operating properly. God, if that PLC doesn't work this time, or we run, some server, goes down or whatever. I mean, you're dealing with a whole nother level of, you know, layers to just making a fucking beer, that it removes a physical element to the actual craft, which is that's there's the sights and sounds and smells, but there's the actual doing that is so satisfactory to making beer, like when you're there, that when you remove it and it becomes, I mean, again, you're just a glorified food manufacturing plant that has all this PLC equipment and you've just removed, I mean, a lot of nuance, um, and decision making that can occur on the fly. Hey, I'm not going to boil. I'm going to boil like 10 more minutes, or I'm going to let it sit a little longer. This looks a little like that. I'm going to kind of do this. And there's, I think that's kind of part of the art of making beer, that if you are pushed as a producer to kind of systematically produce these consistent exacting things, that it's really not an art at all. It's not a craft. It's just a product. And I don't want to be a buzzkill, but I don't know. It just, and not, there's lots of good beers out there that are made that way. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think that there's a lot lost to nuance, and maybe we just want a good beer and we don't want to think about it. Um, I've heard people say it's like headphones. It's a headphone beer. Like put your headphones on and hang out and drink it. But a lot of people just want a good beer. So I'm not going to take that away from anybody or say that our beers are better or not. It's still beer at the end of the day, and it's either good and you like it or you don't. And or you kind of like it, or maybe you don't get it or whatever. I've heard that too. After 7 years, you hear a lot of different opinions from people that get it and people that just don't get it. But Mad Fritz wouldn't have existed without my wine experience. And, we thought of why and how, really why we should make beer. Why should we exist as a brewery? Well, we should brew beer and show that ingredients matter and work with only craft maltsters around the country, just as you would if you were a coffee roaster. I mean, that's the other analogy I like to use, is like,
Yeah.
imagine you're a coffee roaster and you just use Brazilian coffee beans, and you had your Italian roast and you had your French roast, and maybe you had your little gimmicky blends that you put together, and whatever. I mean, you see, that's the brew pub model. You've seen it a gazillion times: the red ale, the bitter, the stout, the porter, the blah blah blah, and the pilsner that's not really a pilsner because they use an ale yeast. Um, and I mean, I guess, if you're really into what you're doing, you're like, well, I got to get those Ethiopian beans from that such and such mountain, and then I want the Kenyan because that's like this, and then the Costa Rican's got that blueberry note, and then I got a bag of that, and we're gonna roast that and do this, and and that's where the nuance comes from, and the imperfections come too. You're not always going to nail it, but I can't tell you, how many beers I've made that I'm like I'm happy with, but I'm not as happy as I'd like to be. You know what I mean?
But that's always striving. I don't know anybody who is. No, I know. I actually, that's not true. I know a lot of people who think that what they made is as good as it can ever be, and that it is above and beyond, and a gift from the heavens to the palates of the unwashed masses, and that's typically the stuff that I don't agree with that assessment. But I think the brewers who are continuously pushing or never quite fully satisfied, those are the ones where we're getting some really fun esoteric, or even just works in progress that are fun to go along the ride with. And you even mentioned earlier, there's some brewers that have a process dialed in, and that we know what these beers are supposed to taste like, but they've evolved over time. They're not stale. They're not just stuck in a time period. They're beers that have grown. Much like children, over time, and sort of evolved and become more interesting and kept up with the times, as it were. The brewery name is a combination of your children. It's Madeline and Frederick. How much of being a parent goes into going to work every day? When you have your kids' names hanging on the shingle outside, does that factor into being a beer maker?
Yeah, it's interesting, and I'm going to refer to some of your other podcasts that I've listened to, because I think this is something you're touching on a lot, and I think it's good. I think it's good fodder. It's carrying on the next generation.
Yeah.
With Heater Allen.
Yeah, I was talking with Lisa about that. Yeah.
And then of course, the name escapes me, but the bigger brewery, largest craft brewery.
Jennifer Yingling.
Yes.
Who? When I talked to her, she did not give any sort of hint that they were going to enter into a joint venture with Molson Coors, but they did that today, and I guess Yingling Lager is going to be available in your neck of the woods pretty soon. So
awesome.
Stock up now on all those green bottles, identifiable by the eagle on the label.
Cool. Well,
but anyway, yeah, family and kids, yeah.
There were some tight-lipped moments I noticed that I think that you were pushing some buttons in that interview, which I loved to hear, and I loved. It was just like, well, she clearly did her homework before she's been spoken to. By her attorney and her
there were clearly defined talking points in front of Jen Yingling, and she was determined to stick to them. And sometimes that's fine, and other times it's not the most interesting radio. But
well, kudos to you for at least asking those questions and seeing if you can get something out.
That flattery is just the Bach talking. But yeah, no, but as far as like legacy and kids and
well, I think that actually both those questions, you bring up this question in both those interviews, is kind of and run some parallel storylines. And I'd say that Whitney's family, and even the family I work for and make wine, I mean, we're dealing with, we're now into second generation that is taking over. But pushing children to do what you do is, it's cute and all, but it's not the way to be a parent. I think. I mean, it's maybe a little bit kind of egocentric to think like, what I'm doing so great that you're going to want to do it too. And because I'm so great or whatever. I don't know. I mean,
well, you also have young kids, whereas, Jennifer's older and Lisa is an adult and had other careers as well. I mean, you have kids in, primary school.
Yeah, exactly. And so, they have other, we're humans. We've got to experience stuff. And if you do experience other things and then you come back to this family business, and that's something you want, then great. I mean, hell, I have no idea what's going to happen with Mad Fritz in the next 5 to 10 years.
Sure.
I have no idea. All I can say is that probably the best way to sum up my thought on Mad Fritz as a business is, I can brew and create these products and enjoy this ride and this journey, um, making fun beers that reflect a place and support farmers along the way and build a community of farmers, continue to build farmers in our area that aren't just great farmers, we've succeeded. And especially if I can use some of that income to pay for my kids' school and get Maddie and Fritz through college,
Yeah.
or at least into it, like, dang, this education stuff is expensive as heck. And
Yeah,
I
it is.
mean, we're looking down a barrel of a gun trying to get them through. And so if we can do it in a way that we're enjoying life and challenged and fulfilled, I think it's all kind of part of the process. Um, I say it, I just, it's really hard to know where your business will be given the context of our environment right now, even with a pretty strong membership. In a closed tap room, you can't taste indoors, you can't taste outdoors. I mean, what the hell can you do?
Yeah.
I mean, you just want to start breaking the law. Um, but it makes you very frustrated in general, not knowing. So you just keep doing it. And luckily, like I said, we have a strong membership, and that's been the heart and soul that have kept our creativity alive. And without that, we would be succumbing to a lot of different you know market forces. We don't make hazy juices. We don't adhere to styles that are trendy. I mean, that has nothing to do with what we do.
Yeah.
Like, I could care less about what's the hot, like, make a seltzer. Like, what? I'm going to make a bunch of carbonated water with alcohol in it with flavors. Like, no way. Like, we're a brewery. We're not a beverage company.
Right. But what
Once
about
you
hard
cross that,
lemonade, though? Would you do
oh
hard
yeah,
lemonade?
hard lemonade. Let's see. Well, we're going to have to, how do we do that?
So
It's going to be
you've
malt
mentioned
based.
membership a few times. Space is limited, and I guess people need to email you at just nile@madfritz.com if they want to get on the waiting list. Is that right?
Yes, there. You can go to our website, madfritz.com. There is a kind of a wait list sign up, and then we open it up for like a week. And then if you get we're literally like a paper trail, old school, excuse me, system here. We're not running a huge back end platform, for better for worse, excuse me.
Okay.
And so yeah, I mean, it's a 1 year ride, and we'll renew you if you want. There is availability, domestic, like within California for sure, super easy. And then out of California, there are some alternatives that are out there. We don't ship out of state. Other people do, so we can get you in contact with them. So, but yeah, we don't have a lot of space in the membership. We're not, I can't tell you how many times you get people visiting. I mean, this has been happening for 7 years, where you get the person that comes in like, what's the plan? When are you going to sell out? Or what's the this? Or how are you going to do that? Or, and you're
I
just
don't know.
kind of, yeah.
Based on the history of this show, I'm now expecting 3 weeks from you, 3 weeks from now, for you to announce, without telling me on
Oh,
the show, this huge new partnership that you've gotten involved with. As a family-owned brewery.
yeah, I haven't decided whether it's Heineken or whether it's Anheuser-Busch.
Now, put your
Or
money in Coca-Cola. That's
Oh, Coca-Cola. Oh
that's where
yeah,
it
there
is.
you go. I don't know. I really want to be bought by like a candy company, and then I could do all the candy infused beers I want to do.
All right. Before this goes totally off the rails, and while we leave people in suspense on how you would make your lemonade, your hard lemonade, I will say thank you so much, Niall. It is always a pleasure talking with you, and I'm sorry that I'm not going to see you at the Big Beers Festival, which happens every January, and we've gotten to hang out the last couple of years, having some beers and being on panels and just sort of talking. And I'm sorry COVID is messing all of that up, but I'm looking forward to pints with you in person and to having you back on to tell us all about your hard lemonade. So thanks for taking the time.
Yes, thanks for having me, and I'll never forget that you needed a ride down to where do we go? What was the brewery?
We went to Bierstadt.
Bierstadt. Yeah, you're like, well, I got to go to Bierstadt, and I'm like, well, I need to go there too. Well, let's go.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful way to meet you, and really love the work you're doing. And thanks for having Matt Fritz on. And keep the great spirit alive, man. And look forward to seeing you soon.
That's Nile Zacherle of Mad Fritz Beer in Napa Valley. You can find him online at madfritz.com. And he's a genuine pleasure to talk with, and I appreciate his time. And I'm appreciative of yours as well. Thanks for tuning in and for all the reviews that you've left about the show and the letters that you're sending in. Please keep it up. A reminder that this episode is produced by Beer Edge, a company I started with my pal Andy Crouch. Check out beeredge.com for articles, podcasts, and to subscribe to the newsletter written by myself and Andy. Also be sure to follow Beer Edge on social media at The Beer Edge. And beer festivals have gone virtual this year. If you're looking to drink and support a good cause, please check out the Denver Rare Beer Tasting 12, taking place the weekend of September 25th to the 27th. It's hosted by Pints for Prostates, and the festival is a live online event with 8 hours of content spread across 3 days, including panels on beer topics, meet and greets with the luminaries of the craft beer world, videos from breweries around the country, and virtual bottle shares. Check out pintsforprostates.org for more information. I'll be moderating a few of the panels, and I hope to see you all virtually soon. Also, check out Steal This Beer and the BYO Nano podcast, and you should visit nanocon.beer to learn about that upcoming virtual conference that can help you start or build upon a small brewery. And please don't forget to go onto Apple Podcasts or wherever you download and leave a review of the show. If you have questions, suggestions, or guests you'd like to hear, you can email me at John Holl, that's JOHNHOLL, at beeredge.com, or reach out on Twitter at John_Holl. Nate Schweber, by the way, was on that road trip with Nile to Bierstadt all those years ago, and he also does the music for the show. Jeff Quinn designed the logo, and he was not on that particular jaunt. My thanks to you for listening. I'm John Holl, and new episodes release every Wednesday, and that's when I'll be back again to drink beer and to think beer.